My name is Agnes. For 47 years, I was Agnes Whitmore, wife to Richard, keeper of his heart and of Hazelbrook orchards. Now I am simply a widow, and 3 weeks ago my children taught me that grief is not the sharpest pain a heart can bear. The memory of Richard is a physical thing, a presence in this old farmhouse as tangible as the scent of old wood and baked apples that lingers in the air. He was a man built from the earth itself, with hands calloused from labor and a soul as deep and steady as the roots of our heritage trees. Pancreatic cancer took him from me in a slow, cruel unraveling that lasted 14 months. In his final days, clouded by morphine, he'd gripped my hand and whispered, "Don't burden the children with this, Agnes. Let them keep their lives a little longer." I agreed, a pact made in love and desperation. But the truth was, our children had been absent long before the diagnosis. Darren, our son, had built a fortress of glass and steel in Boston's financial district, and our daughter, Samantha, floated through life on a cloud of spiritual jargon and our money, always one investment away from enlightenment. The funeral was a gray, hollow affair. Darren stood stiff in a suit that cost more than our first tractor, and Samantha was a vision of curated sorrow in designer black. They were polite, distant, like efficient executives at a mandatory corporate event. I ached for a shared tear, a moment of raw, familial pain, but found only a chilling, professional decorum. I mistook their coldness for a grief too profound for words. I was wrong. The fiction of our family dissolved the next morning in my own kitchen. I was at the sink, staring out at the apple trees just beginning to bud, the chipped ceramic of Richard's favorite coffee mug solid and real in my hand. They entered together, a united front in a war I didn't know we were fighting. There were no good mornings, no mentions of their father. "Mom," Darren began, his voice cutting the silence like a razor. He placed his own sleek metal travel mug on the table, a rejection of the home I offered. "We need to discuss the estate, the orchard, the house. It's time to be practical." Practical. The word felt like a blasphemy in this room, filled with a lifetime of memories. "You can't manage this place alone," Samantha continued, her voice a saccharine echo of concern. "It's too much for you. We found a wonderful place, Sunnyvale Estates. It's a retirement community with people your age, activities." Your age. The words were a cage. They saw the arthritis in my hands, the silver in my hair, but they were blind to the 47 years of strength that ran beneath it all. Then came the document. Darren slid a folder across the worn oak table. The paper was stark white, impersonal. "Dad and I finalized this last year. He wanted me to take control. He signed everything." My breath hitched. I looked at the signature. It was Richard's name, but it was wrong. It was the confident, flowing script of the man he'd been 2 years ago, not the shaky, pain-riddled scrawl of the man I'd spoon-fed broth to in his final weeks. This was a lie, a cold, calculated forgery. "Harold Jennings never drafted this," I said, my voice low. "Our old friend, our lawyer." "He was of sound mind," Darren snapped, his patience thinning. "There's a developer," Samantha interjected, her eyes lighting with a greedy fire. "They've offered $7 million for the land, Mom. $7 million. You can be comfortable. We can all move forward." Move forward by erasing the past, by selling the soil Richard had poured his soul into. The fury that rose in me was so pure, so cold, it steadied my trembling hands. I stood, my body feeling both ancient and powerful. "Show me the will," I demanded, the calm in my voice belying the storm inside. Darren shoved the folder closer. I let it lie. "I'm tired," I said, turning my back on them. "We will talk tomorrow." But I didn't rest. I lay in the silence of our bedroom, the emptiness of Richard's side of the bed a yawning chasm, and I knew with a terrible certainty that tomorrow would never come. They weren't here to mourn, they were here to liquidate. The next morning, I found my small suitcase by the front door, packed by strangers. "We're taking you to see Sunnyvale today," Samantha announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Just a tour, no pressure." The audacity was breathtaking. "I am not going," I stated, my voice flat. Darren glanced at his watch, a gesture of such profound disrespect it felt like a slap. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is binding. The developers close next week. You cannot stay here." "This is my home." The words were a vow. "It's an asset," he corrected, his voice cold and final. "And Dad left it to us. It's time you accepted that." In that moment, the last vestige of my denial burned away. The boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by this hollow man of spreadsheets and signatures. I had one move left, and I needed to make it. "I need my heart medication," I said, my tone deliberately frail. "And I want my photo albums." Samantha's shoulders relaxed. "Of course, Mom, take whatever you need." Upstairs in the sanctuary of my bedroom, I did not weep. I moved with a grim, focused purpose. I collected my pills, but my true mission was in the past. My fingers found the loose panel at the back of the medicine cabinet, a hiding spot from a simpler time when Richard worried about burglars. I retrieved my passport, my birth certificate, the artifacts of Agnes, the individual. Then, from the very back of our closet, buried beneath the soft flannel of Richard's shirts that still held the ghost of his scent, I pulled out a heavy, fireproof box. It was cool to the touch. It held not just a document, but a promise. Downstairs, I allowed Samantha to take my arm. I played the part of the defeated matriarch, shuffling to the car. I did not look back as we drove away from Hazelbrook. I let them believe they had won. But when Darren turned away from the highway and onto a desolate county road, my blood ran cold. We drove for 20 minutes in silence until he pulled over onto a gravel shoulder, surrounded by nothing but weeds and a vast, indifferent sky. "This is where you get off, Mom," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. Samantha gasped. "Darren, what are you doing?" "She'll never agree. She'll fight us, cause problems. This is cleaner," he stated, looking straight ahead. "She has her things. There's a gas station a few miles east." He got out, placed my suitcase on the gravel, and got back in the car. I stood, frozen, watching my daughter's face. I saw a flicker of shame, a war behind her eyes. It lasted only a second before she turned away, closing herself off from me. The car door locks clicked shut, the engine purred, and they left me there. The dust settled and the silence rushed in, a roaring, suffocating thing. I was 68 years old, abandoned on the side of a remote road by my own flesh and blood. I stood there for a long time, the wind tugging at my coat. The despair threatened to swallow me whole, but then my fingers tightened around the strap of the purse I carried. It was heavy, deliberately so. They thought they had left me with nothing, but they were wrong. In my purse, next to the pills that kept my heart beating, was a set of keys. One for the home they had just stolen, one for the truck I could no longer drive, and one small, rusted key that fit the lock of the box I held tightly under my arm. Inside that box was a deed for 20 acres of the most valuable land on the entire property, purchased in my name alone before I ever became Agnes Whitmore. Land that held the only natural water source for the entire orchard. They had the house. They had the forged documents. They had the developer's promise. But I had the water, and without water, nothing can grow. Their $7 million deal was already a ghost. They just didn't know it yet. The dust from their car settled around me, a fine, chalky powder that coated my good flats and the hem of my coat. In the overwhelming silence, the sound of my own heartbeat was a frantic drum in my ears. I was 68 years old, standing on the shoulder of a road to nowhere, abandoned by my children. The enormity of it was a physical weight, threatening to drive me to my knees right there in the gravel. But I did not fall. A strange, cold clarity descended upon me, washing away the last remnants of shock and heartbreak. This was no longer about grief. This was war. A quiet, deliberate war, but a war nonetheless. They had declared it, and I would now choose the battlefield. My first move was to assess my resources. I opened the suitcase they had packed for me. It was a grotesque parody of care. A few sensible, frumpy sweaters I never wore, a pair of slippers, and my daily medications. They had packed a version of me they found manageable, a docile, elderly woman. They had not packed my checkbook, my bank cards, or any of the family jewelry. Of course not. Those were assets now. It didn't matter. The true asset was in my purse. I sat on the suitcase, the hard shell a precarious bench, and opened the fireproof box. There it was, nestled in a manila envelope that had yellowed with age. The original deed for 20 acres of land, purchased solely in my maiden name, Agnes Eleanor Grace, before I ever took Richard's name. The paper was crisp, the ink slightly faded, but the words were unequivocal. It was land we had bought as a hopeful young couple, a fallback plan, our just-in-case parcel. Richard, ever the pragmatist, had insisted it be in my name. "For your peace of mind, my love," he'd said. How right he had been. These 20 acres weren't just any land. They contained the primary aquifer and the natural spring that fed the entire orchard's irrigation system. Without control of this parcel, the rest of Hazelbrook was a dry, worthless patch of dirt to any developer. Darren and Samantha, in their greedy haste, had forgotten the most fundamental lesson their father had tried to teach them. You must understand the land, not just the deed. They had the paperwork for the main property, but I had the land's beating heart. A plan, cold and precise, began to form in my mind. I would not walk 5 miles to the gas station Darren had so callously mentioned. I would walk 3 miles west, toward the town of Hazelbrook, toward my only ally. The walk was a trial. The gravel bit into my thin-soled shoes, and the spring sun, once a comfort, now felt merciless. Every step was a protest from my arthritic joints, a burning in my lungs, but with every painful footfall, my resolve hardened. I focused on the weight of the deed in my purse. It was my Excalibur, my lighthouse. They thought they had left a helpless old woman to wither. They had, in fact, unleashed a force of nature. After nearly 2 hours, the familiar, weathered sign for Miller's Gas and Grocery came into view. It was a relic, a place of genuine connection in a world increasingly devoid of it. Ray Miller, the owner, was a man Richard and I had known for 40 years. We'd shared apple pies at town picnics and helped his boy get a scholarship for agricultural studies. As I approached, Ray was outside, sweeping the porch. He looked up, and his friendly expression morphed into one of profound concern. He took in my disheveled appearance, the suitcase, the dust on my clothes. "Agnes," he said, dropping the broom and rushing toward me. "Good Lord, are you all right? Your face is as white as a sheet." "Just resting, Ray," I said, my voice raspy from the dust and the walk. "It's been a long morning." He looked at the suitcase, then back at my face, his kind eyes seeing right through my feeble attempt at composure. "Real sorry about Richard," he said softly, placing a steadying hand on my arm. "A good man, the best." "Yes," I nodded, the simple word threatening to unlock the grief I was forcibly holding at bay. "Yes, he was." He hesitated, his brow furrowed with worry. "Agnes, where are your kids? Do you need a ride? Did your car break down?" This was the moment. I could make an excuse, preserve the family's dignity, but dignity was a luxury they had forfeited. "Ray," I said, my voice low and steady, "I need to use your phone. It's not a simple matter." His expression grew grave. He didn't ask another question. He simply nodded, his jaw set. "Of course. Come inside, my office in the back." He led me through the store, past shelves stocked with canned goods and fishing tackle, a world of simple, honest transactions. His back office was a cluttered, comfortable space that smelled of old coffee and motor oil. He pointed to the old rotary phone on his desk. "Take all the time you need. I'll be right outside." The door clicked shut, leaving me in the quiet hum of a small refrigerator. My hand trembled only slightly as I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. Harold Jennings answered on the second ring. "Jennings Law." "Harold," I said, my voice cracking with a relief I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. "It's Agnes." "Agnes?" His voice was filled with warm surprise, then immediately shifted to professional concern. "I've been trying to reach you at the house. I expected you for the will reading yesterday. There's been a development." "What reading, Harold?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He paused, and I could almost see him adjusting his glasses, the way he did when he was troubled. "Darren presented a will. It's not the one Richard and I updated last year. The signature, Agnes, I have serious concerns." The last thread of hope that this was some terrible misunderstanding snapped. They left me on the side of County Road 9, Harold, I said, the words stark and unadorned. They packed a suitcase, drove me out to the middle of nowhere, and told me to get out. They're selling the orchard to a developer for $7 million. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. When Harold spoke again, his voice was cold with a fury I had never heard from the gentle man. They did what? I need your help, Harold, and I need your discretion. You have both, he said without a moment's hesitation. My office, can you get here? I'm at Miller's. Ray will bring me. 1 hour, Harold said, his tone now all business. And Agnes bring everything. I hung up, the solid click of the receiver a sound of immense finality and new beginning. I opened the office door to find Ray standing guard, shooing away a curious customer. Ray, I said, one more thing, do you sell those prepaid mobile phones? He nodded, his eyes wide. Sure do, you need one. Yes, and a bottle of water, please. When I tried to pay him, he closed my hand over the bills, his own hand rough and strong. On the house, Agnes. You need anything else, anything, you just say the word. His kindness was a balm on my wounded soul. It reminded me that I was not as alone as they had hoped. An hour later, I was sitting in the familiar, book-lined comfort of Harold Jennings's office. He didn't sit behind his desk. He pulled up a worn leather chair and sat directly in front of me, his kind face a mask of grim determination. Start from the beginning, he said. Leave nothing out. So I did. I told him about the morning after the funeral, the fake will with its impossibly perfect signature, the talk of Sunnyvale Estates, the packed suitcase, and the final chilling moment on the gravel road. I held nothing back. When I finished, I reached into my purse and placed the Fireproof Box on the table between us. I unlocked it with the small, rusted key and slid the deed across to him. Harold picked it up with the reverence of a priest handling a sacred text. He read it slowly, his eyes scanning every line. When he looked up, a slow, grim smile spread across his face. This, he said, tapping the deed with his finger, is a masterpiece. This isn't just land, Agnes. This is the master key to the entire property. With the water rights and the zoning on this parcel, any developer who touches the main acreage without your consent is committing financial suicide. They can't get a permit to build a doghouse without access to this water. I want my home back, Harold, I said, my voice quiet but ironclad. And I want them to understand the cost of what they've done. Then we'll make them understand, he replied, his eyes glinting. First, I'll draft a letter to this developer and their lawyers. They need to be informed, immediately and in legally unambiguous terms, that the property they believe they are purchasing is incomplete and unworkable. I'll also file an emergency injunction to freeze the sale and any transfer of assets. They won't be able to sell a single apple. He stood, energized by the fight. This is fraud, Agnes. The forged will is a criminal act. I looked out his window at the sleepy main street of Hazelbrook. This was my community. This was the world Richard and I had built, and I would be damned if I would let them tear it down. Let's start with the injunction, I said. Let's take away their illusion of control. Just as Harold picked up the phone to call his secretary, my new, prepaid phone buzzed on the table. A single text message lit up the screen. It was from Samantha. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Darren's freaking out. We didn't know about that other land. Can we just fix this? I showed the phone to Harold. He read it and let out a dry, humorless laugh. They're not freaking out about abandoning their mother, he said. They're freaking out because their $7 million payday just evaporated. I looked at the message, at the utter lack of remorse, the transactional plea. Can we just fix this? They didn't want to fix me. They wanted to fix their broken deal. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady. I did not type a reply. I simply pressed the button on the side, watching the screen go black. No, Harold, I said, meeting his gaze. They don't get to talk to me, they get to talk to my lawyer. The game had indeed changed. I was no longer a player on their board. I had become the architect of my own. The silence that followed my decision was not empty. It was filled with the palpable sound of shifting power. Harold gave a curt, approving nod, and began dialing his secretary, his voice transforming into the sharp, efficient instrument I knew it could be. "Helen, clear my afternoon. I need you to pull the original plat maps for Hazelbrook Orchards, specifically the parcel registered under Grace. Then, get me the number for Crestview Properties. Yes, the developers. It's urgent." I sat in the worn leather chair, the deed resting in my lap. My hands, which had trembled with betrayal and the strain of the long walk, were now still. The prepaid phone, a symbol of my severance from the life I knew, lay dark and silent on the table between us. Samantha's plea, "Can we just fix this?" echoed not as a question, but as a confession. They had broken something sacred, and their only concern was the financial shrapnel. Harold worked with a ferocious speed that belied his age. Within the hour, a sternly worded letter was drafted and sent via email and certified mail to Crestview Properties, outlining the contested ownership of the estate and the incontestable, separate ownership of the critical 20-acre parcel with its water rights. Simultaneously, he filed an emergency injunction with the county court, freezing all assets of Hazelbrook Orchards and halting the sale pending a full investigation into the questionable provenance of the will Darren had presented. The response was immediate and seismic. My prepaid phone, which had become my tether to this new, stark reality, buzzed again later that evening. This time it was Darren, not a text but a call. I let it ring, watching the screen light up with his name, a name that once brought me immeasurable joy, now a source of a deep, chilling ache. He called 3 times in succession. When I did not answer, a text followed. "Mom, this is insane. We need to talk. This is destroying everything. Call me." The audacity was breathtaking. He felt something was being destroyed. I did not respond. The next morning, Harold called me at the small apartment I had rented above the bakery, its sweet, yeasty smell a daily comfort. "The developer is pulling out," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Their lawyers are livid. They're citing material misrepresentation and are threatening to sue Darren and Samantha for damages. The injunction is holding. The orchard is safe for now." A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. But it was short-lived. This was a defensive victory. It protected what was mine, but it did not yet reclaim it, nor did it deliver the justice that was required. I had not just been defrauded, I had been abandoned. The law could handle the fraud. The abandonment demanded a different response. "Harold," I said, my voice firm, "I don't want to just stop them. I want to ensure they can never do this to me or to this land again. And I want to ensure that Richard's legacy, the true legacy, endures." "What are you thinking, Agnes?" "I'm thinking about the future, theirs and the orchard's." What followed was a campaign not of loud revenge, but of quiet, inexorable reclamation. I did not return to the farmhouse. It was still tainted by their betrayal. Instead, from my small apartment, I began to orchestrate the future of Hazelbrook. With Harold's help, I formally challenged the forged will. The case was, as Harold put it, a slam dunk. A handwriting expert confirmed the signature was a forgery, a tracery from an older document. The legal ownership of the main property reverted to me, as the surviving spouse named in the legitimate, last-known will. But I was no longer content with mere ownership. I had seen how fragile it was, how vulnerable to the greed of the next generation. I needed to build a fortress around Richard's dream, one made of legacy, not just legal paper. I invited Harold and Ray Miller to my apartment. Over coffee and the bakery's famous peach scones, I laid out my plan. "The orchard will not be sold," I began. "Not now, not ever to developers, but I cannot run it alone. I am donating the core orchard, the land, the trees, the business, to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative. They will run it as a community-owned entity, training new farmers, preserving heirloom varieties. It will be a working monument to sustainable farming, in Richard's name." Ray's eyes welled up. "Agnes, that's the finest thing I've ever heard." Harold, ever the pragmatist, was already nodding. "We can set it up as an irrevocable trust. It would be legally untouchable." "Now for the 20 acres, I continued, my gaze steady. "The deed in my name, that is my personal safety net, but it too must be protected." I looked at Harold. "I want to draft a new will, Everything I own, including that parcel, will be left in its entirety to Benjamin." Harold paused. "Your grandson." Benjamin was Darren's son, my 18-year-old grandson. A quiet, thoughtful boy who had always loved the orchard, who had spent summers with Richard, learning about soil composition and pollination while his father stared at stock tickers. Darren had dismissed his son's interests as unambitious. I saw them as a seed of hope. Yes, with a clause. He cannot sell the land for 20 years after my passing, and he cannot develop it. He can only use it to sustain the orchard or preserve it as it is. This will give him time to become his own man, away from his father's influence. It was a long-game strategy, a planting of a seed that would bear fruit long after I was gone. It was justice that stretched into the future. The news of my actions did not take long to filter back to my children. The civil lawsuit Harold filed on my behalf, seeking damages for emotional distress and the attempted theft of the estate, was the final straw. They were not only facing the collapse of their financial windfall, but were now defendants in a very public, very ugly legal battle. The final confrontation did not happen in a courtroom. It happened on the steps of the Hazelbrook post office, a week later. I was mailing a letter to Benjamin at his college, a letter containing a copy of the old deed and a long story about his grandfather. They approached me, Darren and Samantha together, their expensive cars parked haphazardly at the curb. They looked haggard, stripped of their glossy confidence. "Mother," Darren said, his voice tight, "you've made your point, you've ruined us. Can you please call off the dogs, drop the lawsuit?" I looked at them, my two children, now looking at me not with condescension, but with a kind of terrified awe, as if I were a natural disaster they had accidentally unleashed. "This was never about making a point, Darren," I said, my voice calm. "This was about you leaving your mother for dead on a gravel road. A lawsuit is the civilized way of addressing that. You're lucky that's all I've done." Samantha started to cry, real tears this time, of self-pity and shock. "We didn't know what else to do. You were just always there in that big house with all that land. We thought you'd be taken care of at Sunnyvale." "You thought you would be taken care of," I corrected her gently, the truth a weapon I no longer wielded in anger, but as a simple, stark fact. "You saw me as a problem to be solved, a widget on your balance sheet. You forgot I was a person. More than that, you forgot I was the person who taught you how to balance a checkbook, who showed you that strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room." Darren's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. "What do you want, Mom? What will it take to make this stop?" I looked past them, down the main street of the town I had called home for nearly 50 years. I saw the library, the community center, the bakery, the people who had become my family in the truest sense of the word. "It's already stopped," I said. "You just haven't realized it yet. The orchard is no longer yours to covet. It belongs to the community. The land you tried to steal from me will go to your son with protections you cannot break. You are my children, and I will always carry the love for the people you were somewhere deep in my heart. But the people you are now, you are nothing to me. You are beneficiaries of a trust you tried to swindle, and defendants in a lawsuit you fully deserve." I turned and began to walk away, each step firm and sure on the familiar pavement. "Goodbye, Darren. Goodbye, Samantha." I did not look back. I heard Samantha sob once and Darren call my name, a strangled, desperate sound. But I kept walking. The time for words was over. The following spring, the Hazelbrook Orchards Cooperative held its inaugural festival. The trees were a cloud of pink and white blossoms, and the air was filled with the sound of children laughing and the smell of fresh-pressed cider. I stood at the edge of the orchard, not as its owner, but as its honored guardian. A young couple, beneficiaries of the cooperative's new farmer program, rushed up to me, their faces glowing. "Mrs. Whitmore, the new grafting on the northern spy trees took. We'll have a full harvest." I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile. I looked out at the land, at the legacy that would now live on, nourishing a new generation. Richard's dream was safe. My children, I heard snippets. The lawsuit was settled, a financial blow that cost them dearly. They sold their luxury cars, downsized their homes. They live in the world they valued most, the world of money, but now with vastly less of it, a constant, quiet reminder of the fortune they threw away for a quicker one. They are reaping the barren harvest they sowed. As for me, I found a strength I never knew I possessed, forged in the fire of their betrayal. I am Agnes Grace Whitmore. I am a widow, a mother, a grandmother, a founder. I was left on a remote road with nothing but a rusted key. And with that key, I did not just unlock a deed, I unlocked my own soul. I learned that the greatest revenge is not violence or loud condemnation. It is a life lived fully, a legacy protected, and a peace earned on your own terms. The orchard blooms. My heart, scarred but resilient, blooms with it. And that is a victory more satisfying than any $1 million deal.